All right. Day 532. I mean, today, all right, so let's start off with saying this is not legal advice, not investment advice, not anything. After interviewing people for over 2.5, 3 years, I thought about, okay, if I'm going to study for my real estate license and learn about it, how do I study best? And how do I teach it back to my kids? Because I am a firm believer that you have to leave knowledge and skills for your children. Because that's the only way. I mean, similar to analogy, right? Teach the kid how to fish, don't just give them the fish. So I've been thinking about like, hey, okay, how do I become a better dad? And how do I learn to teach very complex concepts sometimes in a very simple way? So I'm looking for feedback. If you have better ways to explain the legal system and how it all works and how it might apply to real estate, please, please, please tell me. Because one day I know my kid is my kid's gonna buy a home one day, right? So at least that's my hope, and I want to be sure that I equip her with all the knowledge that I wish someone would have given me. So, I mean, when you think about buying and selling, it's just like a big, big item. I mean, you need to have. I mean, today we're talking about law, so let's call it the legal rule book, if you will, right? Having that rule book is so crucial. So let's talk about like, hey, why do you even need like an organized system, right? And if I wish I would explain this to my kid, I would say, hey, imagine you are playing a board game for the first time, and you're sitting down and play for the first time without any instructions. What happens? Chaos, right? Total confusion. Because if you don't have a framework of what you can or can't do, and how do you share information, and keeping track of who owns what if you're playing Monopoly, and how to handle arguments when things get a little confusing or when things go wrong, that leads to confusion. That's a bad experience for everybody, even when you're playing a game, even when you're buying and selling a home. Okay. Now, when it comes to the legal system, I mean, how to explain it? There are rules that shape our deals, right? And I want to think of it as four different ways of going about it. The first one is a foundational framework. I mean, this is a blueprint that everything else must follow. And it's like a document. I mean, if I were to say, hey, let's say your family has rules for the house. Everybody goes to bed at 10. Uh, everybody has to take turns sweeping the floor or doing laundry, or this is the quiet time. Everything has to fit under those rules because that's the family like book or document if you have one for your family. Then there are what I would call officially written commands because these are now the equivalent of real life. If you have elected bodies or councils, they draft and they approve these commands, right? It's very similar to how if you ever went to school with a dress code, they will outline exactly what you have to do and what you have to follow, right? If your family has a chore list, they're going to write down, okay, well, they're going to write on a fridge, like, hey, this person is responsible for this person, or this person is responsible for this chore on this day at this time. That's just very similar to how legislators, which are the folks that you elect to create those laws. Okay, but it's their job to create the laws. Then there are specialized offices, right? They are kind of subdivisions where they create the detailed instructions that clarifies how this law applies to everyday situations. And if I were to think about an analogy, right? Imagine mom and dad, they're going to break down exactly how the chores should be done. Okay. Uh, Very, very similar analogy there. But in real estate, they're going to have certain agencies where they talk about, like, you're going to hear about the planning and zoning, P&Z. You can hear about a building department, right? They have their own rules, their own code that determines what you can do with land, how do you build something in that city, and what's going to get approved because they want to make sure it's safe, right? Especially when people are living in those areas. Now, then there are judicial rulings, right? When people disagree, usually there's some authority that has to step in, decide who is right based on the available information. And that decision can set precedent. That which means that that can affect how future cases are handled because they're going to look back and say, "Hey, how did this person rule on a similar issue before?" Very similar if you you and your brother or sister argue, your parents or your grandparents, they might step in to make sure that things are being fair and try to understand the situation. Similar for properties, right? Similar for real estate. If something gets money, usually you have to go to a judge who can act as authority that can make the final call if no one else agrees. Okay. Now that we talked a little bit about the Constitution and everything, let's talk about when do you actually get people involved, right? There are criminal issues, there are civil issues. I mean, property issues, they can be very minor things, right? Imagine your neighbor built a fence and they built it accidentally where the fence is on your lot. Well, that's a small issue, but still it's an issue. And then there are very serious issues where someone misrepresented or wasn't being truthful about the condition of the home or didn't disclose it. That's pretty serious. Okay. So you have to decide who and how do you want to get involved and who do you want to involve in those situations? Is it a legal argument where you actually have to get someone out there? I mean, it's very similar if you just got in a fight with your sibling over a toy versus someone breaking the rules and doing a big no-no and now you have a whole family meeting about it. Okay. Think about it. These situations in real estate apply to real life every day. It's just different magnitude, different types of problems. And this is going to help you decide what and how do you need to get involved. Okay. Now, when I looked up some of the top questions about real estate, they said one of the top questions about the legal system is just, hey, why are there so many conditions, right? Well, real estate is typically the biggest thing that people typically buy or sell. So it makes sense that there's rules to protect everybody's interest, right? If you're selling a home or you're picking one up, you have the right to expect honesty, safety checks, and just consistent procedures on how those transactions are handled. Because if you don't have it, that deal can turn to chaos. Just like we talked about a board game with no rules. There, you don't know what you're doing. It's no different than if you go play soccer or basketball and there's no referee because now you're just relying on each other to be truthful, and no one's enforcing the rules. Okay, you want there to be a sense of fairness. For very large transactions that might be one of the biggest investments a family will ever make. Okay, so when it applies to real estate, I mean, here's how it applies, right? If you're a seller, you're expected to review any big significant issue with your home. If there's a leaky roof, if there's flooding in the basement, if there's mold there, or if there's old wiring that's not up to code and you know about it, you have to warn them. You have to disclose it. The same thing as if someone borrowed your bike and their handlebars a little loose, or the chain might fall off every once in a while. If you don't tell your friend how to fix the chain for your bike, what if they're riding their bike and they get stranded in the forest somewhere and now they can't get back? You have to tell people what might be wrong. And this is such a great principle just to apply in life. Just disclose, tell people what could be going on. Right. As an agent, you're going to have to follow those rules on how you advertise. Right. If you're a lender, you got to follow guidelines. So you're disclosing exactly what people are borrowing, what the cost of the loan is going to be, and there's transparency around all of it. Right. And what the payback plan is. All that stuff matters. So we got to follow these laws so that we treat each other fairly, and that's really why you're going to see it. Now, some terms you're going to see for your real estate transactions. Let's talk about a few of them. Right? There's a purchase and sale agreement, essential agreement, and that really kind of outlines your terms for the property sale. Right? What what conditions are there? What contingencies are there? Excuse me. And then there are condition reports, right? Or inspection reports. They're typically summaries of all the issues that might be wrong with the home and they don't usually disclose how much it costs to repair them, but then now you know about the issue. So you can go out and get a quote to address that issue. Okay. And then finally, usually in real estate, there's a lot of rules about fair housing. You gotta make sure that you're not being discriminatory. You're not excluding somebody based on who they are, what they look like, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's just common sense sometimes. So just trying to keep your head straight there. Now, if you do end up in disagreement, you gotta understand, usually there's like a basic court, trial court, or whatever. And if you disagree with a ruling, there is an opportunity for you to go to an appeals court. Now, obviously, we've heard of the Supreme Court, but In every state, there's a state Supreme Court, and then there's a federal Supreme Court. So you got to understand there's a state system where it's a basic level judge that might give you the first ruling if you ever get there before settling or arbitration. Then you can go to the appeals court if you just one side disagrees with the ruling, and then finally you can go to the Supreme Court if that's a state case or the federal Supreme Court with the federal case. All right, just think about it because it can really drive how you go about resolving a problem and just understanding the process of how you solve the problem is so important, right? If you ever get in trouble, you might get a talk first, right? Same concept. You know what's coming your way to either solve the problem, prevent the problem, or establish a new precedent on how you might go and act in the future. Now, again, I know this was like a little convoluted, and I just am looking for a better way to teach why the law and the legal system matters in real estate. And if you have good analogies and how you talk about law and what that is to your kid, I would really appreciate it if you leave a comment below with some analogies that you've had. I know we use board games a lot today, but that's probably the most relevant one for me right now is sometimes I want to play board games. And, and I really thought about, hey, what if there were no rule book? How on earth would you know what to do? I mean, I was playing Settlers of Catan, and sometimes you get these weird scenarios like, hey, can we do that? And you have to look at the rule book. That's the exact same thing for real life and real estate. All right. All right. I hope this was helpful, everybody. I'm just having fun. This is not investment advice, not legal advice. I'm not an attorney. I am not a real estate agent. I am studying to be one, but I am just learning how to teach it back to my own kid. That's all I'm doing this for. And this is a little bit more fun than just underwriting every single day. Me learning how to teach, learning how to explain something simply, that's very important to me. So, hey, it's just practice. And I hope you do as long as that with me because I think if you listen and follow the Affordable Housing Podcast, I truly believe that you are just someone that wants to be a better parent every day. And that's who I am. All right. So I hope you all have an amazing Friday. Spend some quiet time with your family and friends today. 'Cause that's what life is all about. I will see you all tomorrow for day 533. Have a good one, everybody.